Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts Sam Foote
and Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 4 of season 4. Sam and I had a recent discussion around cloud security posture management in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. We discussed why CSPM is important to an organization in highlighting risks and misconfigurations in their cloud environment. Here are some of the things we covered. What is cloud security posture management and why is it important? What is Microsoft Defender for Cloud's approach to CSPM? What is Microsoft's Cloud Security Benchmark? And what are the pricing tiers for CSPM in Microsoft Defender for Cloud? It's a really great episode, so without further delay, let's dive in.
Hey Alan, how are you?
Hey Sam, I'm not too bad. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. Another week, another podcast episode. Yeah, it's been a very busy week with work and personal bits. So yeah, it's time's flying at the moment. Already at episode 4, which is incredible.
Yeah, I can't believe we're going to do 2 episodes each at this point already. It's insane.
Yeah, exactly. What are we now? A fifth of the way through the season? So I mean, it feels like we've only just started.
Almost, yeah. Well, a fifth, yeah, you're right, and it's almost a quarter of the way through. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. So, cloud security posture management this week, Alan. Definitely a massive topic in the security space, and definitely a topic that you know pretty well, I'd say.
Yeah, well, I did my Microsoft talk, didn't I, on it? So I thought we might as well not necessarily regurgitate, but it's definitely an important topic to talk about. And it's sort of, like you said, it's one of the key things that are sort of spoken about in the world at the moment.
Yeah, there's some really good tooling there and some really tangible benefits. So yeah, should we get started and crack through it?
Yeah, sure.
So let's sort of take a bird's eye view of cloud security posture management. What is it, and why would an organization want to adopt it?
Yeah, okay. So cloud security posture management, CSPM, is a process of identifying risks and misconfigurations within cloud environments. So this is mainly around it being automatically visible and being able to identify and potentially remediate some of those misconfigurations and risks. Why is it important and why is it useful? Some organizations may not know what is in their clouds. Might not know what's in Azure. May have developers, IT teams building infrastructure, building services in there, but maybe not taking a security view of what they're deploying. Maybe it's not done by infrastructure as code. Maybe it's just manually deployed. So there is a high chance that there are misconfigurations, and without going through individual workloads within those environments and understanding what's configured, which will take a lot of time. A couple of people to do that manually, at least, depending on your cloud environment, to be able to find those misconfigurations if you know what you're looking for. So a cloud security posture management solution, in effect, automates that process and goes through your cloud environments and looks for misconfigurations and provides recommendations on how to improve the security of that workload.
Okay, so are there sort of two sort of benefits there, really, from what I heard you say? Is the first part really around discovery of your cloud resources? Are we saying that organizations, especially in maybe larger organizations, sort of, maybe B2B product companies and the like that, sort of build in Azure, do they have really struggle with discovery and understanding what is even in the environment before you even get to misconfigurations?
Yeah, that is one part of it is grabbing an asset list across all of your environments, because you're right, you don't necessarily know how many virtual machines you might have overall, or web services, things like that. And then the second part being your misconfigurations, to highlight those risks in that environment to potential attacks. You may have a misconfiguration of a virtual machine with a public IP address that's got the management ports open.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about some of the sort of a working scenario there. I'm just thinking you take let's say an organization which was quite quick and adopting cloud. Maybe they were early into Azure and they've been building ever since. I can imagine with because with manual deployment of resources, um, let's just say those environments might not be documented in any sort of way, right? It might just be bring up a workload and then move on to the next, build going forward. um, my assumption is once that, from an operational perspective, once that resource is in, you know um, those teams might move on to new projects and and move forward, and there could be, it might not be misconfigured when they originally deployed it, I suppose. But as new tactics and techniques are released, and more understanding or new features are released, you could potentially just naturally gain misconfigurations over time, I assume.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that new features coming out potentially could open up new misconfigurations because it hasn't been configured. Or there's like you said, there might be legacy configuration there that needs to be updated to meet the new standards that are out around. I'm thinking of things like TLS levels, tiers, things like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Um,
about how best practice shifts over time, right? It's
yeah,
constantly evolving. You know, um, if you talk about like just in time port opening, for servers, and like the way that you would utilize that, and maybe now you would go down like a bastion route instead of having to do that, right, to get secure access to specific servers and things like that. Just as those products evolve over time, maybe not new features like immediately dropping misconfigurations, because
yeah,
I haven't seen that, but just best practice moving on and changing, with the time, so to speak. um it's like a constantly evolving problem, it feels like to me.
yeah, exactly. And you need to be able to monitor that change in best practice, like you said. Then then CSPM can help with that because it's continuously updated at that
And
point.
is it fair to say that the owner of the um, security aspect of a resource might be different than the owner of the person that developed or deployed that resource? Are we talking about different teams of people here, in the organization? Are we talking about some people just building, moving forward, and then other people sort of coming in to clean up and harden after the fact?
Yeah, I guess it's part of that process. Kind of probably talking around your we did the DevOps episode where you're talking about the Sec DevOps or the DevSec DevOps and DevSecOps side of things. I got to remember which way it was now. Where that's now becoming a terminology to use where that code. I mean, it's necessarily code, but say infrastructure in that scenario, being checked and things like that. Where you're right. In previous decades, it may not have been checked that way. It might have been build and then security come in later, and so this is kind of taking the IT security side of things to look at the environment as it is and to understand the risks that are in that environment. Um, it may be down to the owners of the resource to maybe remediate the misconfigurations or reduce the risks within that workload, because they know what they've built and why it's built that way, kind of thing, and maybe a reason for it. So they may need to um, under maybe make changes to their solution to remove that risk.
Yeah, definitely. And I think because it's an automated, you know, tool, you've effectively got that constant checking, haven't you? You've got that sort of big brother effect, looking at those resources in near real time, right? So the feedback loop is very efficient, because those teams can be alerted of those remediations relatively quickly.
Yeah, and I guess if you don't have a CSPM today, then that initial discovery will be potentially big. Might be a lot of recommendations, but once you've gone through that initial discovery, remediated, and that, then your continuous, like you said, the continuous viewing of it, new resource being built, etc. You'll be able to see that change in the posture instantly, and you'll be able to remediate quicker because hopefully resources when they're being built aren't going to production straight away, which means you've got the time to make those changes. Where when you first start, you might have hundreds, thousands of resources in production that you are more difficult. They're more difficult to make those changes to.
Yeah, and I think that first sort of scan of a an environment can be quite overwhelming, when it comes back, because in theory there's a lot of security debt there that maybe people don't know about,
Yeah.
because they haven't, maybe they haven't had a breach, or they haven't you know been through that process yet. you know it might start to show you things that you never even, well, resources that you never even knew existed potentially. um I'm thinking like MSDN subscriptions, things like that. And then,
Yeah.
but also, it's the sort of benchmark of, a resource's posture for every single resource you've ever deployed. And yeah, in some large cloud environments, there can be thousands or tens of thousands of resources, right? Which, potentially have to be um, reviewed at that point.
Yeah, and we're seeing. I think we've seen a couple of instances where a development environment has been compromised, and that's how they've got to production as well, haven't we? I think there's been some high visible ones, isn't there? So
Yeah.
even those environments need to be monitored, at least understanding that risk in those environments.
Yeah, and that blurred line, I've seen it quite a lot, the blurred line between production and development. And especially when we talk about infrastructure, I come from a software background where there is always a dev, staging, and production environment. I say always, the majority of the time. But in infrastructure, sometimes, you know, um, if you don't have two Azure ADs and you integrate with it, it might be that your development environment is pointing at your production AAD, right? And that might just be a decision from somebody previously to not roll a new tenant, having to set that up. Maybe they're pressured on a deadline, etc., etc. And because it's in like a development environment, it doesn't really, it doesn't go through change. It doesn't go through any formal process of that. Just it's kind of a wild west at that point, isn't it? So yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of people sort of ignore development environments, like because it's not production, there's no production data there. There's less risk, but actually, because there's less control, I'd sometimes argue, actually, I would argue that there is more risk in those environments because there is less oversight and control, right? So we've definitely had that conversation with people where it's like, is CSPM should CSPM cover development environments, and what's the value of remediating development environments? But because humans control those environments, anything could happen, right? And we're all inherently lazy. Well, no, we're not all inherently lazy, but a lot of people that build things are. It's their job to automate. So, we just got, I think it's for the better of everybody that we've got these systems in place to nudge us in the right direction all the time.
Yeah, and I think the first stage is understanding what's there, like the discovery piece. If we're not able to do the remediations immediately, at least like you said, that risk that's there.
Exactly. Yeah. Just knowing. Yeah. Just knowing is critically important. Okay, so can you talk a bit more about how Microsoft Defender for Cloud approaches CSPM, and sort of what features does it have?
Yeah, sure. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud has two sort of tiers, two SKUs for it. You have foundational CSPM and Microsoft and Defender CSPM. And the kind of features you get overall with both of them is that security misconfiguration, and weaknesses, your asset inventory, your secure score, so a posture score for your environment, the ability to be able to visualize your data around your environments in using the Azure workbooks. You can export that data from CSPM into other data data visualization tooling. There is some automation there using logic apps. So when you see some of the misconfigurations, you might be able to run a logic app to send a Teams message to somebody, or maybe do a PowerShell or something to remediate when it makes sense to. There are some quick wins in there for remediation, so some tools already in there built in. You gain access to the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. That's the kind of stuff you get in the foundational. And then in Defender CSPM, you get governance, the use of regulatory compliance to benchmark your environment, the cloud security graph, attack path analysis, agentless scanning for virtual machines and discovery within Kubernetes, container registry vulnerability management, data-aware security posture, and external access. I don't know. I can't remember how you say this actually. EASM insights in network exposure. So that's the kind of things you cover. So there's quite a lot there just for CSPM, because we just sort of talked about asset management and weaknesses at this point.
Yeah, can I sort of circle back on a couple of those bits? I think for me, secure score is obviously massively powerful way of representing like a sort of complex view of a world, right? And sort of distilling it down to a simple number that is quite easily digestible for a lot of people. So we've obviously got Microsoft Secure Score. Is Secure Score in Defender for Cloud similar to that? Is it effectively the same controls? Is it how does it sort of stack up against?
So it's in effect a similar concept as the secure score within Microsoft 365, but it's all around just the cloud environment. So it will have some subsections within the recommendations. So it'll be like identity, data in transit, kind of things like that. But in effect, it gives you, based on how many resources you have, it will give you a with your recommendations, it will tell you how much you can increase your score, and it's out of 100%, like secure score is within Microsoft 365, and you can then improve that by remediating some of the recommendations. In there, and some of those recommendations can be identified as risks within. You can accept the risks. One part of it is that there may be some. So the example is multi-factor authentication. So one of the recommendations is to ensure that you've got multi-factor authentication on owners within Azure. Now that's great if you're using Microsoft Authentication, because it's able to detect that and be able to tell you that you've got it enabled for your owners. But if you're using a third party as your identity provider, like Okta or Ping Identity, things like that, then it can't detect that you're doing MFA there. You might also be using Duo as your MFA and integrate it into Azure. Without being able to see those, then it will always come up saying it's a requirement or recommendation. So what you can do with the recommendations is go in and in effect, update the risk to say exclude this recommendation because I have a third-party solution in place, and remind me in a year's time to review it, or a 6 months' time. So you can decide when you want to review that recommendation again, because you might have changed technology at that point. You might be going through a process of moving to Microsoft Authenticator for your MFA. So that's quite good in there. That there may be something that you can't change in a environment because it will break your application. Maybe you need FTP instead of SFTP. Maybe as an example, you may need it so you can mitigate it against a resource or a subscription for a period of time, then review it later.
Yeah, so you can accept that risk, but then you can also put some governance around managing that risk, right, over some sort of time period, which is really powerful. Have you tried attack path analysis? Because it's relatively new, and I think it's for me it's one of the standout like features of Defender for Cloud now.
Yeah, I was part of the private preview for it before it came out and became sort of GA, with the CSPM going GA in March. But it's it's really good. So it identifies in effect, as it kind of sounds, the attack path from through your resources and your roles to how someone could take over a subscription or a resource. So it's very easy to see where your weak points are within your environment.
Yeah, and I think what's great is because you get a sort of a visual representation of that path, right, and the points on it in which you would maybe want to remediate and plug. I think it's a really good way of prioritizing certain resources, and seeing where your best sort of bang for buck remediations are, if that makes sense, because trying to work out where you should start is always quite a complicated thing with CSPM, right? Because you get a bunch of recommendations, but then it's like, what do I do with this? Basically, right? So that can really help you to visually see your most maybe sensitive resources and protecting them.
Yeah, exactly. And to be fair, when you look at those recommendations and in general your resources, there's no way you would understand that without doing some deep analysis of all the resources, understand where your weakest resources are or how someone can jump through your system. Because you might think it's absolutely fine. There's no reason why someone could jump between those resources.
Yeah, well, I suppose in a lot of organizations, I'd probably argue that a lot of those relationships between resources are not mapped or not well documented, right? If somebody got access to this VNet, this would be like, this would be their avenues to basically move throughout, your resources, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, and that I think is, as that mapping is done automatically for you, and then linking it back into recommendations for you is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to probably talk on the last one, which I couldn't announce, the ASM, is the external attack surface management. So it's one of the other Microsoft Defenders that are out there. So you can see what your attack surface is from your external side of Azure and things like that.
Okay, no, that's yeah. I think we could definitely deep dive into all of those different features. It's kind of like Defender because this is one part of Defender for Cloud, right? And this is the thing
Yes.
with Defender for Cloud. It's not really one product. It's like, what is it, like 12 products in one? And CSPM then breaks down into a bunch of different products underneath that
Yeah,
as
well,
well, right?
it's kind of I think it's kind of three areas now. You've got you got CSPM, you've got cloud protective workloads, which is I think what you're talking about with all the other defenders that we've done that
Yeah,
are out there. And then I think you've got your sort of code security. So Defender for DevOps now is
DevOps,
being
yeah.
its own section now. So yeah, it's only, I say a small section, but it's not. It's definitely feels like at least a third of the product, if not more.
You're referring to CSPM, yeah?
Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely, yeah, 100%. Okay, so lots of companies are multi-cloud. Is CSPM supported on anything other than Azure?
Yes. So it is available. So CSPM is available for AWS, GCP, and some on-premise workloads. So when you're using Azure Arc, so um, Microsoft Defender for Cloud used to connect to the other clouds, but it wasn't very. There's a lot you had to do the other side to configure it. You had to enable and affect the security workloads in AWS and GCP to get the data to come into Defender for Cloud. But last year, when Microsoft announced they were going multi-cloud and they were doing some changes with Defender for Cloud, they made that connector really simple. So now all you do, in effect, is for AWS, you get a CloudFormation script, and then you can just deploy that, and it will create some IAM roles, and then allow Defender for Cloud to connect into it and collect the data. So you don't have to worry about configuring anything within the other environments to be able to get the data. It will go off and read it. And same thing with GCP. It's just a cloud script that you run, and it creates the roles, etc. in it. So yeah, not all of those features I talked about earlier are on all of the clouds. Some of the newer ones are Azure and AWS only. Some of them just Azure at the moment, but they are, as they come out for Azure, it seems like AWS is the next one, then GCP comes later. So they're definitely pushing hard to get those out, because I think some of them came GA in March, and they're already on 2 of the clouds. For the third one to come. So that's the clouds that they cover. AWS, GCP, and Azure, of course. And like I said, some workloads are available for the on-premise environments when they're configured via Azure Arc.
Yeah, and there's obviously third-party CSPM products that are out there which do target multi-cloud, but I haven't seen a sort of. I'm not aware of a CSPM product from one of the major cloud vendors that actually supports the other clouds.
No.
That they're pretty insular, and it's very interesting to see Microsoft acknowledging that a lot of organizations now are multi-cloud, for various different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And they need securing. So that's kind of, while CSPM is going over there and collecting, the recommendations, things like that, it's also going to recommend, having the protective workloads go over to them as well. Defender for Server, and some of the, I think it's Defender for SQL and Kubernetes, I think, are the ones that are going over to the other clouds at the moment. So yeah.
Okay, so in that list, you talked about the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. Can you just sort of explain what that is and why it's important?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about Secure Score, and that's kind of like Microsoft's recommendations, best practice scenarios on how to secure the cloud. Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark is using using some of the regulatory compliances out there to build a benchmark for all the clouds, every cloud, for AWS, GCP, and Azure. So it's a combination of the technical controls from CIS, PCI, and NIST. So the technical controls for AWS, GCP, and Azure are all within that benchmark. So you can see whether your cloud environment using those 3 regulatory compliances meets that framework, or meet that high level framework. I don't know, quite robust security framework on configuration. So you can break it down into the different sort of controls, and then you can see all the recommendations within those controls. So then you can so if you do need to be CIS compliant or NIST, you can use that one to get you to that level, plus plus more, because it uses some of the other ones as well. So it's pretty, for me, it feels like a very solid benchmark to go against, and that's included in the foundational. So you get that from the start, because regulatory compliance side of things is from the in Defender CSPM tier. If you want to go against a specific regulatory compliance and version of that regulatory compliance.
Yeah, so I suppose if you're an organization that doesn't have to or hasn't yet adopted a regulatory, a formal certification of a regulatory compliance
Yeah.
framework, right? Then Cloud Security Benchmark is going to get you a really good, robust set of controls that should then the organization decide, okay, we want to go down the CIS route, then if you've hit that benchmark, chances are from a technical perspective, your controls are highly likely to be covered at that point. Obviously, regulatory compliance frameworks, only a subset of the controls are technical, right?
Yeah.
People and processes it is massive in there, but from our side, from the technical side, you can get started straight away. Hardening your environments. You don't, in theory, you don't need to wait, do you? Because because it's included in foundational, there's kind of no reason not to use it at that point.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as you enable the CSPM foundational on one of your clouds or your accounts, etc., it will then start feeding into that um, the cloud security benchmark. So you're straight away already getting that information, whether you need it or not. So it is really good in that stance that you get that you know that you're going against real controls from regulatory compliances out there, without having to um, well, they're just there, aren't they? It's just done for you. You can just start building towards it. And like you said, if you then decide to go for NIST or CIS or PCI, you're pretty much going to be there from your technical side.
Yeah. So talking about other regulatory compliance, because sometimes if you talk to um, somebody in the compliance space about the cloud security benchmark, they might not have ever heard of it, right? They might be an ISO practitioner, etc. Um, how do like other, I'll call them quotes, real regulatory compliance frameworks actually fit into that?
Yeah, so Microsoft has in effect a database of those with has a database of all the regulatory compliances. They have a good database of them, and you can then apply them to your cloud environment. So you may have a subscription that is maybe your PCI subscription. Maybe you're separating it via subscription. Maybe you got one that needs to be ISO. Um, you can in effect apply those regulatory compliances to those subscriptions, accounts, or projects within the other clouds, to then see specifically those compliance frameworks. So you do have things like ISO in there. You have various NIST versions as well. Same thing with ISO. There's quite a few in there. Maybe in the new one as well. Um, and a lot of them are also available for the other clouds. There's definitely more for Azure being first party and being probably going through that process already in Azure before they move to multi-cloud. So some of those other regulatory compliances are moving to CIS to AWS and GCP. You also have some of the I think AWS has a foundational benchmark as well of their own, and I think Microsoft adopt that as well. So yes, you can put them in there, and then you can see specifically against those regulatory compliances how much you comply with it, and you can generate audit reports for it. So if you need to do it for auditing, things like that, you can then generate it and see where you are. So that's quite handy as well for some of your auditing.
A large part of that compliance is sort of governance and attestation, verifying, what you say you're doing, you're actually doing. So what sort of governance life cycles are in place in Defender for Cloud for managing the remediations?
Yeah, so now you can within the subscriptions, the projects, the accounts, you can now specify some governance around it, some rules, which says that you get notifications about new remediations required. So as the cloud environment changes, maybe a new resource is created, and then there's a new recommendation for it. But maybe you're not looking at it 24/7. Looking at the recommendations all the time. Maybe it's once a month. Maybe it's once every 3 months. You're able to then automatically assign the recommendations to users, as well as just going manually and in assigning the recommendations. So that's really good now. So then you can give ownership to those recommendations and give them a grace period to remediate, and then they can update, say, I need more time because of this. So there's more of an audit trail there than about why recommendations or risk hasn't been mitigated. So yeah, that's the kind of things that are in there now. I mean, the great thing really is that if you've got a tag within Azure that says the email address of the owner, you can then get it to automatically say, if I see recommendations for a resource, automatically send it to the owner, which is this tag, and this is their email address, and then they automatically get assigned. So it means that any new resources coming out to get deployed and they got recommendations, they get the email straight away, and then the grace period starts.
And what I like about that is, and we kind of have that in like DevOps and and sort of the interaction around Git repositories is, when we have automated tooling on pull requests and we all agree what we're going to put in, right? So if we're going to put Terrascan in, we all agree that we're going to do Terrascan, and then that's going to run. And if you commit some changes and then that flags, then we all blame. Well, you blame yourself and you blame Terrascan, right, for like shouting at you. And what I like about that is that Defender for Cloud is then just we all agree that we're going to use it, and this is the way that we're going to configure it, and whatever comes out of it, it's not manually assigned, is it? It's just I've deployed some resources in Defender for Cloud, which is a faceless tool. It's not a person inside the organization, has then picked up that you need to make some changes. But also the business gets that audit trail of notified Sam on the 1st of January, asked Sam to remediate in 90 days. 180 days have passed and it's still not remediated or even looked at, right? And at that point we've got an actual, we'd hope it wouldn't get to that point, right? But we can then start to see that the life cycle of that misconfiguration, which is really powerful.
Yeah, and it in effect it does chase you in emails to tell you you've got this amount of recommendations to do. But also I think there's a report that can be generated to see which ones are close to their due date and things like that, or overdue. So then you can from an auditing or from that process, you can then go and start chasing in person.
And that takes away a huge amount of manual intervention, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like having to set up calls with teams to talk about the remediations and, to assign them to people and manage them and all of those things. It's just Defender for Cloud does all of the legwork, so to speak, of chasing people and all of that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah, and when someone gets set as an owner of an action or a remediation, they can change the owner to someone else. So maybe it goes to the owner of the product that they're working on, and then they can assign it to say, maybe a product's got VMs and SQL and things like that, and they get all of the recommendations. They can then assign the remediation tasks for SQL to the SQL devs to resolve because they've deployed it. So it doesn't necessarily have to always go directly to the team, individual people. It could go to a product owner scenario from that, from your perspective, or area owner. Maybe it's like a resource group level, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it sounds really good and well thought out of that, process. Definitely. Okay, so I suppose the big question is this all sounds great and all, Alan, but how much does it cost?
That is a good question. So, foundational CSPM, drum roll, it's free. So you get
Really
all of that.
free? Really free? I suppose I'm paying for the resources, aren't I? So
yeah, okay.
But
yeah, to add it on top, it is included in your current usage of the cloud environments.
But yeah, okay. But it's okay, so but it is completely free. And did you say it's turned for Azure it's on by default?
Yes, I mean, when you go into Defender for Cloud, it in effect will ask you to upgrade to the new versions, but I think you can just not bypass them, but not ignore them. Skip them for now, whilst you look at what you can currently use it for, because in effect, is that Microsoft are recommending that you enable all of the protected workloads, and that to secure your environment, but you may need to take that process of understanding what the problem is and how much cost is going to be on your environment. So
Okay. And is that just free for Azure? What about AWS, GCP, and you talked about on-premise with Arc? Is that right? Are all the environments free for foundational?
yeah, you don't have to pay any more for them. So creating the connectors into the other clouds doesn't cost you anything to be able to collect that data. It is just the Defender CSPM that is a cost to have the
Okay,
extra
so
features.
you pay for the resources, and Microsoft is going to give you a level of posture management with all of your resources free of charge.
Yes, so like I said, you can use the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark for free,
Yes,
and
exactly.
that gives you an insight into those three regulatory compliances for free.
And if it is pulling best practice from those three regulatory compliance frameworks and sort of amalgamating it into one thing, that's also pretty powerful by itself, isn't it? Considering it's no extra charge.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, like we are kind of saying, if you need to do if auditing for your other regulatory compliances um, needs to see the report from specifically for CIS, etc., then that's when you need the other framework adding to those subscriptions.
Okay, and that framework, that next level, that next SKU, I suppose, is Defender CSPM. So that's where you get everything then. And how much does that cost?
So probably about 3 weeks ago, 3 4 weeks ago, it was $15 per compute or data resource. So that is a storage account, SQL, virtual machine, similar things in the other clouds kind of thing. So it seemed quite expensive to run because you may have 100 virtual machines just to do, in effect, get that deep dive into CSPM. And that's mainly around the agentless scanning of VMs and things like that other capability there, because you don't have to run an agent on a server and it take compute away from your, you may have a critical compute sensitive resource that you now can't do scans on, so it takes that away from it. But as of, like I said, 2 or 3 weeks ago, Microsoft dropped it down to $5 per compute or data resource, which I think is great. I think it's more acceptable, at least.
Yeah. And I suppose what you're really paying for there is that extra intelligence that you talked about, the agentless scanning. Um, there's
Attack path stuff.
attack path, but there's also the regulatory compliance angle as well for those extra frameworks and the governance as well as part of
Yeah.
that uplift in Defender for CSPM. So you are getting, I don't know, 6 or 8 extra features there for a one-time extra $5 per month per resource. So I suppose this more stings for smaller environments, I would have thought, right? Because like if you've got a burstable VM instance that costs you $12 a month, then $5 a month relative to the cost of the resource is going to be quite expensive. But on the other side of it, if you're an organization that requires regulatory compliance, chances are your workloads aren't even utilizing those types of resources, right? One would think that
Yeah.
your consumption is quite heavy in Azure for your workloads.
Yeah, I mean, you yeah, you're right. And it might be also Sting environments where there's a lot of compute and data as well. If you've got a lot of other resources, yeah, if you've got a lot of logic apps, for example, and Azure Functions and web apps, web apps, then it's not based on that. I don't think it's all based on compute and data resources. So
Yeah. And I suppose you've got to balance that of the human cost, right? Of
yeah,
managing these things, and I suppose Defender CSPM's biggest competitor is foundational, right? Because you do get a lot in foundational.
yeah,
It's quite a generous free tier. Um, but I suppose when you're talking about, maybe because realistically to get, you know, some virtual machines could be thousands of dollars/pounds a month, right? So tacking on $5 a month relatively, it isn't too painful. But I suppose across a larger state, that can build up. But then to do this manually, to map across regulatory compliance frameworks and search through all of your resources, that must take a lot of human cost to make that happen.
yeah, and I think kind of the key thing to think about is really that agentless scanning, because in effect it's taking a snapshot of the disk, the VHD disk in effect in Azure, and scanning it without the VM being touched. So there's no interaction with the virtual machine as it's active. Reducing, like I say, reducing compute and things like that. 'Cause you may have to run those scans and things like that. You may have to increase your machines. I don't think you would need to, but that might be if it's compute sensitive.
Yeah, but you've got to deploy and manage that agent, haven't you? Right, you've got to update it when there's new versions. You've
Yeah,
got
and it
to test the
could take.
impact of it,
Yeah, I was just about to
right?
say, yeah, exactly. You don't know if it's going to cause disruption within your applications.
And
If
I'm
it's
not saying
scanning.
that happens a lot, right?
No.
Because, generally, a lot of agents that are provided, for tasks are really effective and they don't have any sort of impact. But for very sensitive workloads, like compute sensitive workloads or critical systems, right, that you don't want to, let's say you have a highly critical, system in your business, um, and it can't be touched. Maybe it's the VM that does the batch jobs for payments overnight or something like that. I don't know, random example, but like it just has to work and nobody goes
Mhm.
near it unless like there's something really going on with it, um, trying to discover what's potentially, the misconfigurations on that machine can be a hard risk to overcome and to battle against.
Well, and the other thing is you're changing that environment, so you may have to go through your change process to be able to deploy the agent, things like that as well. And like you said, it might be that when you're patching it, it can't be on auto patch. It can't keep up to date. Maybe you can only do it once every 3 months to keep it up to date.
Yeah, and then I suppose you've got the cloud security team, right? If your organization's large enough to have one of those, whose sole responsibility is like the posture management of their cloud environments, then they have to keep going back to those teams to get patched and to go through that process. So in some respects, the busy work of that and the risk might end up costing a lot more money than $5 a month agentless scanning that nobody except for finance has to worry about, if that
Yes,
makes sense.
exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I can definitely see that benefit for sure.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a lot within here that is. There's nothing. It is. A it's a enhancement to looking at all that information. It's not. Nobody really wants the job of going through all these resources and doing all of that. It's not something that is, you know, right. Okay, we've got CSPM, so now we can get rid of X team kind of thing, is it? At all. It's more around this is the mundane sort of tasks of getting that data, doing that analysis for you to have the results, then make decisions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. So, Alan, any other parts of CSPM that you don't think we've covered, that you want to call out?
No, I think we've covered quite a lot, even though there's still probably quite a lot to cover still. um, probably one thing to probably mention is that in season 2, episode 8, we did a securing multi-cloud environments with Microsoft Defender Cloud. So it's probably looking more around the protective workloads. But I'm thinking that was probably last year, about the same time as now, I think. So
I
I think a
apologise for the
lot's
production
changed.
quality of season 2, if you go back to listen to that. But yeah, it might give you a
Yes.
bit more context of what Defender for Cloud was like back then.
Yes. So Sam, what's episode 5?
Okay, so episode 5, I'm going to be on that one, and I'm going to be talking around Azure Confidential Ledger. And I know a lot of people might not like the word blockchain, but Confidential Ledger is a blockchain technology hosted by Microsoft in Azure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain what it is, at the value and the features that it gives, and try to give some real world scenarios that you can apply blockchain technologies inside your business. So hopefully no fluff and blockchain buzzwords, but I think it's a really innovative product, and it's got some real good applicable use cases.
Okay, great. I look forward to that episode, I think. Cool. Okay, so did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple or Spotify. This really helps us reach more people like you. If you have any specific feedback or suggestions, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thank you very much, everyone. Catch you on
Yes,
the next
thanks
one.
all.
Cheers. Thanks, Alan. Thanks. Bye.